Okay, I think we have covered the part of the evaluation and we need to move to the next one. The next one is about deal structure. You remember we mentioned in the beginning there are various ways of M&A, we can call it, or partnership in general, which is invest, acquire, partner. Would you like to say a few words about the various types of these deals? If you have any preference, which one should start first? Because it doesn't need to be full acquisition, right? You can start in a different way. So any comments on this from Ajay or from Vibo? This is about the deal structure.
I must admit that on this particular point, I have a very simple view. And the view is that the deal structure depends. It depends very much on what is the acquiring company, what is the company you are going to take over. But one of the key things is that a startup is successful because it's doing something special, and that's why you're interested in it, right? So one of the key elements that you have to ask yourself in a deal structure is how can we retain as much as possible the strength of this particular acquisition? Because in a big corporate, you're under always the risk that it is walked over by the suits, with all kind of funny questions. So that's the first thing I would say. It depends. I must say it depends, and you really have to look very carefully what is the best way to keep, let's say, the capabilities and the competence and the differentiation of a startup in place. Having said that, generally spoken, a startup should be viewed and reviewed in a very different way than a big corporation. So, for instance, if you look at a company like a big company, they have their metrics in place, their monthly business reviews and all the circles, right? But the metrics of a startup is very different. I mean, sales growth is something which is fantastic, but you cannot manage sales growth month by month compared to the plan you made 3 months ago in the startup. You have to think about, do I reach milestones, having products on time, or I reach milestones in time, for instance. And so also you have to think about how to make sure that such a capability is embedded in whatever deal structure you make. I like what you said before, Mike, that in general, it is better to keep a new company separate until they're big enough and that they understand what the corporation is expecting from them. But in the meantime, I'm not derailed by trying to adapt too quickly to a corporate structure, because the reason why we've been acquired is that we are different. So they need to keep that differentiation also for a long time. The last thing that I want to mention here is, and maybe that comes back later, but that is that the deal structure is also very much dependent on whether the acquisition is really embraced by the entire organization or not. Sometimes an acquisition is embraced by the top management. The top management says, this is fantastic, we're going to do this in a very different way. But if the operational teams, with the teams who have to deal with them, sometimes you say, oh, we can leverage the sales team as an example. But if the sales team is not interested to start selling new things because they have their heart in their own thing, you really run into trouble. So you really have to think about if the organization that is going to deal with the startup or the scale-up is really embracing it or trying to resist it. And sometimes the bosses like it and the execution teams don't like it, and that's also a very big risk for failure. And if you start to understand that as a leadership, you really make it maybe a different deal than when you are seeing that everybody really likes to embrace it and bring it in and on board in the big corporation. Mm-hmm. So, but I'd like to repeat in the last thing, it depends. And you need to really think through it, depending on the situation of both the companies and the startup, the big company and the startup.
Mm-hmm. So, Ajay, just 10 seconds. Vibo, what you said, I would like to summarize one thing, right? If you want to have a successful acquisition, provided that due diligence has worked well, you need the alignment and agreement of 3 parties. One is the corporate M&A, second one is the top management, and third is the business unit that is going to work with the startup. Something.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
That's the summary of what you said. Okay, thank you. So Ajay, please, your philosophy here.
No, Mike, there is one thing I want to say. If you look at the about journal M&A, the corporate M&A and the corporate venture capital, and these is two separate organizations are happening, and they have totally different intent. So when we tend to talk about startup, and the corporate M&A don't get involved too much. I hardly see that kind of thing happening. And it's normally corporate venture capitals, which is like, for example, the KPN in Netherlands, and they have created a venture capital arm, their own venture capital arm. And the objective of it is to really scout for the good innovative possibilities, which because the corporates also want to protect their brand image for with the wrong acquisition, because the cost of wrong acquisition is much higher than really the success. So you want to avoid that. And most of the time, if the bigger companies doing a corporate M&A, they're trying to do a market acquisition, or they're trying to do something of bigger size or scale up, which could be converted into BU much faster. So then the deal structure is kind of very in the full acquisition. So you normally don't talk. And when there is a JV size, normally that is for the market determination on going to a particular market. Like for example, one startup I'm helping, they are setting up special units and manufacturing in multiple 3 countries to start with. And for each country, they have separate M&As. One is with the Rio Tinto, for instance, in France, so, and one in other country for a different company, depending on. So there are multiple models to do it. But when we talk about startups, they normally tend to end up with the CVCs of the corporates and not to the corporate M&As. And because the corporate M&As do not have bandwidth to handle those things. Their board decisions are much more broader, bigger, and they tend to take a bigger decision. So acquisition has to be much more higher strategic impact if the corporate is doing the indirect M&A. So most of the time I've seen is like, for example, the KPN, when I witnessed this, the corporate venture capital, this is a new trend. It used to be the case, but now they're saying, okay, management bandwidth has to be protected for the corporate. Let's move the smaller things, let the plant bleed into some good size. Then if it is about to become a tree, then we plant it into our own garden and make it. Until otherwise, let the seedlings into the small pot and then let it become a bit bigger, and then we plant it into our own. And that is a good time to test. And this is what I've seen. And that also gives a flexibility to startup to grow and align, because then they give the corporate gives the full mentoring. And there is also the new concept, which is a collaborative CVCs, which is coming up, where the few companies can come together and they create a VC because one cannot do it. So in the deal structure, depending on what size it is, I always say that it depends, and what kind of marketing impact or strategic impact is going to come in. So there are a few considerations need to happen before you make a deal structure decision. That's my thinking. So I will agree with the word. As soon as you do MBA, the only thing they teach you is never say yes or no, say it depends. Then start your answer. So in the deal structure, it's always say it depends how it moves. So what the such situation demands. It's a situation analysis. So for me, startup thinking directly to see corporate acquisition is kind of like a fairy tale thinking. It doesn't happen anymore until unless you have a bright intellectual property which can revolutionize the world, and they want to absorb it. But otherwise, hardly it happens. Yeah, that's
thank you, Ajay. I agree with you. When the companies that have CVCs, then it goes the way you described. But there are many companies that don't have CVCs, and then there are a few corporate managers that they need to run the process, and then they need help, right?
And that is where the biggest problem lies, because when these corporates, they try to say that one manager can handle this, because one is you cannot have the enough bandwidth to do it. You don't have enough collab. And getting an approval into the board, it becomes critical, because, for example, once I helped an Indian company to acquire a Dutch company into the EV space. And that was a critical decision before we concluded that acquisition. And even after conclusion of acquisition, it was 50% acquisition. And it was kind of startup, but the acquisition cost was 20 million. So it was more into the scale up stage already, moved into it. So most of the time, corporate managers can think of it, but then it's a whimsical, I don't think you have to create the right bandwidth, you have to create right partners and the right thinking approach, and which has to be a bit away so that you can have the safeguarding mechanism in place. That's why a lot of corporates are relying on 10x or even giving the CVC kind of VC responsibilities to these accelerating platform, because that is the only way they can manage it, and they can partner it, they can mentor it, and then they appoint the mentors into this platform, and then they acquire it. So that's the process. And that's what I've seen.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes. So companies that are corporates, but they don't have the right resources, they need partners to evaluate and accommodate the transition between the scale-up world and the corporate world. Yes, we experience very often. So I need to move on to the organizational setup and culture, which is a very important subject. I see every time we have any article or any video about this attracts a lot of attention. The first question I have is, what is the best organizational setup integrating a scale-up in a corporate organization? If it's not startup, what is the best organizational setup? So who would like to start? I can kick off if you want me. Jay, would like to go first? Go. Okay. Vibo, go.
Okay. So I don't want to say I don't know, because that's not supposed to be. But also here, I would say it depends very much. It depends very much. One of the things is very critical. That is, if the organization is very traditional and something new happens, a new company is created, then you run the risk that if you try to integrate it as quickly as possible to leverage existing resources, because that's sometimes happening, like the sales or the IT systems, etc. You run the risk that when you have too many new things in one go, you have a new team, and you have a new product or service, and you have a new setup, and you want to make changes. So then you run the risk that if you try to integrate it too quickly, you run the risk that you have that you destroy the acquisition very quickly. So that's why, in general, I agree with somebody said it. I don't know. Keep it separate as long as it is big enough and strong enough to sustain on its own and can become an independent unit, and then start to think about leverage, start to think about how can I make use of common resources and so. But don't start with that. Let's first show the company, the acquiring company, that you can run on your own, that you can create the growth that you've been looking for. And when that is happening, then it's also more easier to start thinking about integration and leveraging resources. So that would be my first thing. The second thing is, if I may have one more thing, is what I have seen very much in helping startups, not especially in an acquiring system. What I find sometimes difficult as an advisor to these kind of startups is that some of these companies are really doing something very smart, really look things into a different way. And then because they feel themselves special, we've done this, we have achieved that, we have this, you see us growing. Then they sometimes do not realize that mundane things like how do you do F&A, how do you do some basic logistics, how do you set up an HR system, or how do you do something which is, let's say, outside of the scope of the knowledge and the experience of the founders of the startup, that they think that when you say, well, if you organize logistics, for instance, better do it like this and not do it like this in the other way, because, and then you have something which has nothing to do with the innovation, but which has something which has to do with execution. And what I find sometimes difficult to recognize is that sometimes people who have started a company, have achieved some results, that they do not know what they do not know. And that you start arguing about mundane things like execution, which doesn't work. And that is something which has also an impact on whether you would like to acquire a company or not. If you recognize that people do not know what they do not know, then you can already predict it will be much more difficult to get such a company integrated into a larger setup, even after they have had that time to become an independent part of the company. So that is something I always look at, you know. And so sometimes people who have a startup do not realize that areas where they have no expertise, they need other expertise to help them to achieve, let's say, a normal operations.
One thing, if Mike, you allow me to add.
Please.
When I see an acquisition coming from corporate, it comes with a purpose. You just don't acquire an organization and then decide a culture. And most of the time, let me just say two types of acquisition which happens. Sometimes it's, for example, in the 5G space, which I'm happening is a product augmentation. So you have a product lineup, you wanted to add up more products so that your portfolio gets better. And then you can acquire simple companies and integrate it. Or sometimes it is a new technology altogether or a new geography. So depending on what type of acquisition and what purpose acquisition is, the organization structure or the culture, organization structure has to be set up. And of course, I agree with Vibo. It's like when you enter in a new company name, you get a new logo, new ID card, a new HR process. You have to train. There is a small process. There is not a small. That's the most complicated and most difficult process to really make culture aware for the new companies to become part of the organization. But at the same time, depending on the type of acquisition it is, you can say how timely you can do an acquisition. You can integrate into the culture of the new company or the old company. And the biggest mistake happens with the corporate when they acquire the company and they left it alone. And then it's like a baby becoming a part in the family, but not being cared of. And most of the time, you have to make sure that they're continuously being felt, they are recognized, they are needed, and they are integral part of the corporate culture for the growth of them and the company itself. And that is the biggest message which need to be sent across all the time during the integration process. And how fast, how strong, it depends on the type of acquisition. So within an organization, it can change. So I will never say that within an organization, you should have one culture of acquisition or setup. You could have multiple setup and multiple speeds of acquire, integrating the companies. I will say startup or scale up into an organization. That's my 2 cents on it.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to make a statement here, a summary of what we discussed. In general, startups, as long as they are small companies, like has been described from both people and you, Ajay, normally startups cannot survive as they were when they are integrated in a corporate organization, as they were as a separate company. I mean, a scale up has more chances to survive. That's a bit the statement and the reality practically, because as a startup's not surviving means maybe some people are integrated within the company to do what they know to do well, or a part of the IP is integrated, but the company itself is too small to survive in a corporate organization. Okay, this is not a question. I think it's more a statement. I have one more question on this chapter, and I would like to move to the next one because there are many questions. So the next question is, I would like to hear what are the top 3 critical success factors for M&A of corporates with startups and scale-ups. So the top 3, in your opinion, each one individually. The top 3 critical success factors. Vibo, would you like to go?
Yeah. The team. It's all about people. And all the things that have to do with the product, the service, the financials, it all stands or falls with how does the team look like that you're going to deal with. And that means is the team coachable? I'm talking about it all the time. Is the team listening? Because a startup has to learn a lot. They do a lot very well. Is it coachable? But also, as you mentioned earlier, the acquiring team. Is the team that acquires, is this a bunch of corporate guys who have done their career sitting in their offices and building careers? Because that's the big thing. People in corporations are mostly busy building careers. I'm sorry to say so, but that is how I look at it. Whereas people who are in startups or scale-ups, they are busy with building their dream, creating something that they really go after. And so you have to look at that's why I say teams. Look at a team that is acquiring, look at a team that is being acquired, and are these teams able to and somehow work together as a team? That's why I say 3 times team. It's maybe a little bit silly, but this is really what I believe.
Thank you. Ajay.
I think this 3T model of the
Please stick to 3, please.
Yeah, no, so I think that's there is no dispute on it, and the 3T, and the team, and I have seen the most of the failure happens because of that. So the success factor, and of course you have to add. There is always the difficulty lies, and I always say that empathy at the time of listening capabilities within the team, and able to solve the problems, because everybody wants a success, and that's what I think. And the people are looking in a different ways of the success of integration. The question is that can you really listen to each other and come to a good solutions? And that's where it is a team quality. And that's where I feel that the listening capabilities within the team is critical factor. And when you are implementing, it's an emotional thing. You have to make sure they are felt needed. So when the small company joining a big company, because I left the company after Alcatel and Lucent merger happened, because when the Alcatel acquired Lucent, it said merger. It was not an acquisition of a small company. Within Europe, Alcatel was dominant, and in the US, Lucent was dominant. So what you find out that a lot of people in the Lucent left in Europe because they find out that they are not so much welcome, and that's where it has to happen. And it's always about people on the success at the end of the day. Yeah, and because the rest is already evaluated in detail. Yeah.
So I would like also to add something from my side, and I will make it a bit more concrete, although what you say is the truth, but I want to make it a bit more concrete. My experience says the top 3 is people, business model, and cultural fit. And so, I mean, you can have also in certain situations another one, but that's my experience. People, business model, cultural fit. Okay, now we go